The entire dining room stopped breathing. Semyon Mogilevich, the man Interpol called the Brainy Don, the man half of Europe's criminal world had built careers trying to please, had just risen from his chair and pointed across the room at the nanny. 30 guests in black tie went perfectly still. His men stepped forward. His mistress pressed painted fingers to her mouth. Everyone understood what an accusation in this room meant. It wasn't a beginning. It was an ending. But Demi Dawson didn't run. She didn't cry. She didn't say a single word in her defense. She set down her water pitcher, laced her fingers together against her chest, bowed her head, and prayed. Out loud, in a tongue so old and so buried that 3 men at that table felt the blood leave their faces before they even understood why. Semyon Mogilevich went pale, and in that moment every person who recognized those words understood. This gray-uniformed woman was no nanny. She was a ghost. From a network he had personally erased from existence. And somehow, impossibly, she was still here. The Mogilevich estate smelled of beeswax candles, roasted lamb, and the kind of silence that costs money to maintain. Demi had learned its rhythms, the way you learn a language you were never supposed to speak. Slowly, carefully, with the constant awareness that one wrong syllable could get you killed. She moved through the corridors with her shoulders rounded and her eyes low, carrying tonight's linen napkins in a stack pressed against her chest. 6 years of practice had made her nearly perfect at this. Being present without being seen, existing without being remembered. She hated nights like this one. She had a system. Every morning at 6:15, Demi was already in the kitchen when the cook arrived. She made the children's lunches herself. Not because anyone asked her to, but because it gave her 40 uninterrupted minutes in a room with a window that faced the east garden, where the groundskeeper left the estate's maintenance logs in a weatherproof box beside the rose bed. She had been reading those logs for 2 years, cross-referencing them with delivery schedules, building a map in her head of every room in this house that nobody talked about. The ledger was in the basement archive. She was almost certain. 3 more weeks and she would know for sure. In the meantime, there were the children. Misha was 8 and already too serious for his age, the kind of boy who watched everything and said little. And Anya was 5 and had her father's eyes and absolutely none of his coldness. Demi had not planned to love them. That had been her first mistake, thinking love was something you could plan around. She told herself they were assets. She repeated it on the hard nights, when Anya fell asleep against her shoulder and Misha slipped crayon drawings under her door because he thought she looked sad. She repeated it, didn't believe it, and kept going anyway, because that was the job. The annual dinner happened once a year, last Friday of November. 30 guests minimum, the whole household reshuffled for a week beforehand. Demi had survived 2 of these before, quietly, efficiently, invisible. She had planned to survive this one the same way. Then Irina's necklace went missing. Irina was Semyon's mistress, a former model from Minsk who wore her diamonds like a second language. The pendant had been there at 7:30. Demi had seen it catching the chandelier light as Irina descended the staircase. By 8:15 it was gone, and the estate had gone into a particular kind of lockdown that had nothing to do with the security team and everything to do with Semyon's expression. Demi felt it the moment the room shifted. She stopped mid-pour at the far wall and understood, not the surface of it, not the missing necklace, but the shape underneath. Someone had chosen tonight, this room, this crowd of witnesses, her proximity to the situation. She set down her water pitcher very carefully and thought, someone knows. The question was how much, and what they planned to do about it first. She had maybe 4 seconds between the moment Semyon stood and the moment he reached her. She used the first second to confirm there was no exit she could reach. The second to count his men. 6 visible, probably 3 more she couldn't see. The third to accept that running wasn't the option she'd thought it was 6 years ago, when she first walked through these doors. The 4th second she used to make her choice. Semyon stopped in front of her. The room was so quiet she could hear the candles. Every guest had turned. Every bodyguard's hand had moved. His eyes, flat, black, unreadable as always, settled on her face with the particular weight of a man who had already decided the outcome and was simply waiting for the paperwork. "This woman," he said in English so the room would understand. "Ari stole from my house." Demi set down the water pitcher, both hands, slow and deliberate, so nobody's trigger finger got ideas. Then she laced her fingers together in front of her chest, bowed her head, and opened her mouth. What came out wasn't a denial, it wasn't an excuse. It was a prayer, low, rhythmic, ancient, in a language so buried that 3 men at that table went rigid before they'd consciously recognized why. She felt Semyon go still in front of her, felt the temperature in his stillness change. She kept praying. She either died here or she changed everything. There was no third door. He had stood in a burning building once, 17 years ago, in a city that no longer existed on any map he kept. His men had done clean work, thorough, professional, the way he'd always insisted. The handler who ran the network had been dealt with first, then the analysts, then every safe house, every relay point, every name in their cipher system, dismantled one by one until nothing remained that could speak. He had been told, no survivors. He had made sure of it personally. Standing now on his own marble floor, listening to words he had not heard spoken aloud since that night, Semyon Mogilevich felt something move in his chest that he did not have a name for anymore. It wasn't fear exactly. It was the specific sensation of a man who had been absolutely certain of something for 17 years, discovering, in the space of 12 words, that he had been wrong. His face didn't show it. It never showed anything. But his hand, down at his side, had gone very still. She was still praying, eyes down, voice steady, like she had nothing left to lose. Or like she'd already decided losing didn't frighten her. Both possibilities were equally dangerous. He didn't have her taken to the basement. That surprised everyone in the room, including, briefly, Demi herself. Instead, Gregor, his head of security, a man who communicated primarily through eyebrow movements, appeared at her elbow and said quietly, "Upstairs." Just the one word. She went. Semyon's private study was nothing like the rest of the house. No chandeliers, no marble, no performance of wealth. Just books, a desk that had been used hard, and 2 leather chairs positioned near a window that looked out over the dark grounds. He arrived 4 minutes after she did. He did not look at her immediately. He went to the credenza, poured 2 glasses of something amber, and set one on the small table beside her chair. "Sit," he said. She sat. He took the chair across from her, crossed one leg over the other, and studied her the way you study something you're trying to remember, not to understand it, but to place it, to locate it in time. Outside, the dinner was presumably still happening. 30 of Europe's most dangerous people, eating lamb and pretending the host hadn't just walked out of his own party. Nobody downstairs would say anything about it. That was the kind of man he was. He picked up his glass. "How long have you known where it is?" Demi looked at him steadily. 4 months. Something shifted at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile. "And you didn't take it?" "Not yet." She told him everything, not because she had to. She was past the point where survival required full honesty, but because she was tired. 6 years is a long time to carry something in both hands and pretend it weighs nothing. She told him about the network, what remained of it. 3 people. A handler in Brussels she'd never met in person. A data archivist in Warsaw who was 71 years old and had a cat named after a Soviet general. And her. She told him why she came, how she got in, what the ledger contained, and why it mattered. She told him about Misha and Anya, and her voice didn't change when she said their names, but something in her jaw tightened, and she let it, because she was done pretending that part wasn't real. Semyon listened without moving, without interrupting, not without the small verbal signals most people use to show they're still present. He just watched her, and she spoke, and the amber in their glasses went untouched until she stopped. The silence afterward lasted a long time. Then he said, "The necklace wasn't you." It wasn't a question. "No," she said. He nodded once, slowly, like he'd been waiting for the rest of the equation to arrive. Gregor found it 40 minutes later. The pendant was in the inside breast pocket of Victor Laszlo's coat. Victor, who had been with Semyon for 11 years, who had a house in Prague, and a daughter in university, and a second phone that nobody was supposed to know about. When Gregor laid the necklace on the desk, Semyon looked at it for a moment without speaking. Victor had been feeding information for at least 2 years, routing it piece by piece to a network operating out of Budapest that had been trying to locate Semyon's financial archive. The real one, not the laundered surface version, for the better part of a decade. The accusation against Demi had been his move to force a crisis before she could reach the ledger herself. Kill 2 problems with 1 public scene. It had almost worked. The Semyon turned the necklace over in his fingers once, then set it down. He knew what she was, Demi said. It wasn't a question either. Apparently, Semyon's voice was even. Completely even, the way a very flat sea looks the moment before weather arrives. He knew before I did. Which is its own kind of answer. Victor was no longer in the building. Demi didn't ask where he'd gone. Some questions weren't for her. Not yet. She told him what was in the ledger then. All of it, not the summary she'd rehearsed for her handler, but the real version, the one she'd sat with alone in her room over 4 months of reading and rereading, understanding slowly what she actually had. It would destroy Semyon. That part was true. 14 years of financial architecture, shell companies threaded through 6 jurisdictions, names that would end careers and start prison sentences across 3 continents. But buried inside it, encoded in a cipher she'd recognized immediately, because her organization had invented it, was something else entirely. A name, a series of payments, a set of instructions dated 17 years ago, authorizing the dismantling of her network and the elimination of everyone inside it. The signature wasn't Semyon's. It belonged to a man named Radovan Kess, currently the deputy director of a European financial oversight body, respected, decorated, photographed shaking hands with heads of state. A man who had built his entire legitimate career on the grave of the organization he'd ordered destroyed. A man who had been operating through Semyon's infrastructure for a decade and a half, hiding in plain sight, because nobody who knew the truth was supposed to still be alive. Semyon was quiet for a long time after she finished. "You came here for him," he said finally. "I came here for the ledger," Demi said. "He's in the ledger." Another silence. Then, very quietly, not to her, almost to himself. "He's been inside my house for 15 years. He walked to the window, stood there with his back to her, looking out at the grounds, and she let him. She'd said everything there was to say. The rest was his. She thought about Misha. The way he'd started leaving his bedroom door open at night so he could hear her footsteps in the hall. She thought about Anya's drawings. The ones she kept in a folder under her mattress, because throwing them away had never once felt like something she was capable of doing. She thought about 6 years of mornings in a kitchen that smelled like someone else's coffee, and how somewhere along the way she'd started thinking of it as hers. She had not planned any of that. It had happened to her the way most true things happen, slowly, without announcement, until one day you look up and realize you are somewhere you never intended to be. And leaving feels like amputation, but she had a job. She had always had a job. Semyon turned from the window. He looked at her with those unreadable eyes, and for the first time in 6 years, she looked back without performing anything. No soft smile, no rounded shoulders. Just her face, open, exhausted, waiting. "Take it," he said. She didn't move. "All of it? The ledger. Everything in it." He walked back to the desk and stood behind it. Except one page. She knew which one before he said it. The oldest entry. The one that connected his earliest accounts to a series of transactions that predated everything else in the archive. The page that, in the wrong hands, would finish him not legally, but personally. The page that proved he had once, a long time ago, tried to do something legitimate, and failed, and chosen differently. As she had read it 4 times, she had never understood until this moment why she hadn't been able to make herself photograph it. She reached into the interior pocket of her uniform, the one she'd sewn herself, 8 months in, for exactly this purpose, and removed the single page she'd printed 3 weeks ago when she first understood what it was. She set it on his desk without a word. He looked at it, didn't touch it. Then he extended his hand. She shook it. His grip was firm and brief, the handshake of a man who understood that some agreements are more binding than any contract, because they are made between people who know what the other one is capable of and have chosen, anyway, to step back from the edge. She walked out of the study, down the back staircase, and through the kitchen that smelled of roasted lamb and candle smoke, far and out the service door into the cold November air. She did not look back at the house. She had learned, somewhere in 6 years of practice, that looking back was the one thing you couldn't afford to make a habit of. It had nothing to do with sentiment. It had everything to do with what comes next. And there was always, always what comes next.
Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more stories like this. Your support truly means a lot.